Over a year ago, Bioware graced us with their first title launch since Anthem. But instead of a new IP, Bioware had worked hard on a remaster of one of the most beloved game trilogies of all time. That's right, Mass Effect received the remaster treatment in the form of the so-called Legendary Edition. And the first game in the trilogy wasn't the only one that received some love, but Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3 were also revisited for a touch-up by the devs over at Bioware, which resulted in a collection of games that have now been introduced to a whole new generation of gamers. How's it going, guys? MrHulthen here, and what I want to look at today is whether Mass Effect Legendary Edition was actually all that good. A sort of review, where we look back at one of the most hyped up remasters in recent memory. Hell, is it worth getting into now if you decided to skip it? Should you reinstall it for your 10th playthrough? And aside from money, could there be any other reason to why Bioware decided to release it last year instead of further into the future? Well, let's dive right in. Now, leading up to the launch of the Legendary Edition, Bioware promoted the collection pretty heavily, but more specifically, they mostly promoted the first game of the series. I remember there being very little in general that we saw about Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3, and today it's pretty evident as to why. You see, Bioware had realized that most of the work they had to do was going to be focused on Mass Effect 1. One big reason for this was the very outdated combat and gameplay. And the most egregious example here would be the mechanics of the sniper rifles. As in the old Mass Effect, there was this extremely annoying sway that made sniper rifles one of the worst weapons you could use. In the Legendary Edition, the sway was completely removed, and you can now snipe away to your heart's content without missing a shot. This was of course not the only thing that was fixed, as several other aspects of the gameplay were very much improved. Like the camera being placed closer to Shepard, which created a more intense combat experience, and the leveling system being overhauled, as well as creating a new UI and improving the old menu. These improvements to the gameplay were all well and good, but the main draw was obviously the graphics, and Mass Effect 1 was definitely in the most need of a facelift. The improved textures and lighting did wonders for the scenery, the prime example being when you first land on Eden Prime, which is your first experience on an alien world, where not too long after, you see your first Reaper, Sovereign, rising to the sky as it leaves the planet. The in-game scenes weren't the only things to receive this beautification, as so did the cutscenes. The assault on the Citadel looked especially beautiful and epic in the Legendary Edition, and if there's one moment that really sticks out to me, it's this one. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3, while also being included in this remaster, didn't really receive the same amount of attention as Mass Effect 1. You see, both Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3 were both major step-ups in the gameplay department back in the day before the Legendary Edition. But after the Legendary Edition, I'm not so sure, especially when looking at Mass Effect 2. Since Mass Effect 1 received a considerable improvement on combat, you would think that this would carry over to Mass Effect 2. An example here is the ability to proficiently use any weapon in your arsenal, which was something Bioware added to the remastered Mass Effect 1. However, this feature was not added to the Legendary Edition of Mass Effect 2, which threw me off because I had gotten used to being able to experiment with different weapons and builds in the first game. Added to this that Mass Effect 2's wooden combat system still remained, so the overall combat in the second game felt like a step down rather than a step up. But then again, Bioware made sure to tweak other areas of the game, like balancing guns, letting you buy basically every piece of equipment from merchants, speeding up the planet scanner, and again making the graphics noticeably better with smoother frames, crisp textures, and also introducing 4K support. So even if the combat still felt wooden, the overall Mass Effect 2 experience has just never been better. But now we also need to talk about Mass Effect 3. Now, the last game in the trilogy was also improved in the technical areas, but this is also where the main draw, aka the graphics, was improved the least, and for obvious reasons. The main one being that it's the newest of all three games, so it just didn't really need as big of an improvement here as Mass Effect 1 and 2. Other areas from Mass Effect 3 were improved though, the most obvious one being the war assets. As the Legendary Edition didn't include a remastered multiplayer, Bioware resorted to rebalancing the amount of assets you needed to unlock the different endings. Of course, just like the previous games, Mass Effect 3 had numerous improvements and balancing changes to make it a more enjoyable experience overall. Now, if we boil this down to technicality, then a resounding yes, Mass Effect Legendary Edition is definitely worth checking out if you haven't already. Bioware did a great job at analyzing what exactly needed to be improved for a remaster, and made changes accordingly. The story is the same, the characters remain unchanged, basically the heart of Mass Effect is just like you remember. And the upgrade to textures and lighting really didn't hurt some of the more personal scenes between characters. It very much enhances the already excellent dialogue scenes you experience throughout the trilogy. In all honesty, Bioware could have just stopped at remastering Mass Effect 1, but they pulled through and gave us an entire trilogy of games that, when released together, felt like one big experience. But now let's talk about that cryptic thing that I mentioned about why Bioware possibly could have released the Mass Effect Legendary Edition last year and not further into the future. As most of you know, Bioware are working hard at the next Mass Effect game. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the Legendary Edition launched just 6 months after the next Mass Effect teaser made its debut in December 2020. From what we do know, the next game seems to be a sequel to the original trilogy and only loosely connected to Mass Effect Andromeda, if at all. And several signs from the material that we've gotten so far points us toward the possibility that Bioware could canonize several events from the trilogy. And that's where the player statistics come in. You see, after the Legendary Edition had been out for some while, Bioware shared some interesting information that they had collected as people all over the world played through the Legendary Edition. Examples of this data are these, where we can see how many people chose to save the Council and what percentage of players skipped out on recruiting Garrus. Which, if you actually did, you're a monster. Anyway, in another piece of collected player data, we can see how many players chose either the red, green, or blue ending for Mass Effect 3. Now, am I saying that Bioware is using this collected data to build off of for the next game? It's possible, but another reason to why they're sharing this information could also be to prepare fans for the eventuality that they will have to take a certain canon route in order to build the next game. Is this a guarantee? No, not at all. This is just my speculation going. What is a guarantee, though, is that Bioware made sure to release Mass Effect Legendary Edition shortly after the next Mass Effect teaser trailer, relatively speaking. Which, at least to me, looks like they've been priming the fanbase for the next Mass Effect game. Now, in my honest opinion, the Legendary Edition was probably released as a sort of palate cleanser after Bioware's string of subpar game launches. A palate cleanser and a reminder for what is to come. To put Mass Effect on the map again, and prepare us for the upcoming adventure, that for now, we know very little about. The Legendary Edition renewed the hope that, for me, had faded since a long time ago. Mass Effect Legendary Edition was not only a great remaster, but a necessary one. Bioware needed this win, and they nailed it. And that is why I'm so extremely hopeful for the future of Mass Effect. So yeah, if you haven't played the Legendary Edition yet, I suggest you do. Otherwise, you'd be missing out on one of the greatest fictional works ever made. I also want to take a few seconds and thank all of you for watching my videos ever since the Legendary Edition came out. It's all thanks to you that I've been able to make this my part-time job. And hopefully, with your continued support, I'll be able to make this into something bigger. Anyway, that's all for today. Thank you for watching, and have a great day. MrHulthen, signing out.